In a time when monsters, commonly referred to as players, were being mass-produced in a laboratory, the elites of society had a hobby of betting on the fights conducted among these brutal beasts. This show was quite entertaining for the ones at the top of society until these players started developing human characteristics, and eventually 13 of them escaped the facility. 2 humans produced during the same experiments had also escaped the scene, and one of them was a kid escorted by a doctor named Kanzaki Goro. We move 10 years forward in time and find a city filled with frequent crimes committed by these monster players. By this time, we met with Goro again as he was living in the slums with the kid he got out with, who was now named Kanzaki Jin. Goro was playing the role of a grandfather now and is constantly advising Jin to stay away from any sort of violence. Jin heads out to the city on a usual patrol, and while he's out, he saves a woman named Akemi who was being harassed by some thugs. Jin had saved Akemi in exchange for 10,000 yen, but before he could have received his payment, 2 of his friends named Koga and Konoha Amagi came to drag him away. Koga tries to give Jin an earful, but Jin ignores him and prefers to show a strange ring that was on one of his hands, referring to it as the Angel Ring. Around the same time, we see how a player comes in contact with a man named Seiji, while Akemi succeeds in finding and paying Jin his 10,000 yen as thanks. Jin was super happy as the money was a lot for him, but sadly, when he reaches back home, he finds all of the neighbors alongside his grandfather dying. The old man gives Jin one last piece of advice before his life fades away, but since Jin had no idea of what dying actually means, he tries to heal his grandfather by various means. When there was no one willing to help, Jin decides to take his grandfather to Akemi, who was generous enough to help the kid out. As Jin is at the hospital, Akemi's heart becomes soft towards the kid, and instead of leaving him with the police, Akemi's motherly nature takes Jin in as her own family. Elsewhere, we see how Goro's old acquaintance Mitsugai was on the move to find Jin, and after a little while staying together, Akemi takes Jin out shopping. As the pair was walking down the road outside, they are attacked by the same player who was around Seiji earlier, and he transforms to fatally wound Akemi. Seeing Akemi on the ground now makes Jin go mad, and he shows a glimpse of an epic power before he passes out after defeating the player. Seiji arrives to check up on the situation, and he seems to be quite interested in how Jin will turn out when he grows up. On the same night, the player is shown to be handled by a masked person, and on the next day, we meet with Jin again, who happily reunites with Akemi as she had somehow survived the wounds. A few years pass by ever since that horrific night, and we see Seiji again as he is now getting involved with a flame player. The kids had grown up too, and while Koga and Konoha were living nice and famous lives at school, Jin was out on the streets helping many homeless people out. Jin had grown up to be a competent young man, and he still was living with Akemi, who was earning the bread for the two by running a little food stall. Things were seemingly just fine for Jin, but as the years added up, so did old man Mitsugai's desire to seek a powerful creature named Zet. Koga was aspiring to be a hero after all these years, and to fuel his dream, his father's corporation was supplying him with the latest tech. After Koga had attended the conference at school, Konoha was telling him how she saw Jin earlier when she was out in the park. The siblings are interrupted by their team as they were supposed to patrol the streets now. Koga was out to complete his first job that involved the flame player from earlier, and while he was on the way, we find Jin already squaring up with the monster. By the time Koga infiltrates the building, the fire has spread everywhere, and as soon as he meets up with Jin again, the pair heads over to help a family that was stuck in the burning building. The situation was bad, since there was not enough time to save the parents alongside the children. Koga wanted to just leave the adults, but since Jin was against the idea of children growing up without their parents, he pulls off a crazy stunt that somehow saves the entire family. Koga leaves the scene, and Jin gets back to the flame monster. The monster overpowers Jin and even stabs him right in his gut, but that just leads Jin to transform into a powerful creature. Jin easily kills the monster now, but as soon as the flame player dies, Jin returns to his original form and gets injured in all the rubble. Konoha finds Jin, and while he is taken to the hospital, Koga's father gives the credit for the whole mission to Koga so it can be good for their brand. This fight finally leads Jin right into the hands of Mitsugai, who refers to Jin as the Zet before Jin wakes up in confinement. Mitsugai had brought Jin to one of the research laboratories that were under Amagi Corporation, and the sole reason for doing so was to awaken that inner creature named Zet inside Jin. While Jin was in the lab looking at his biggest nightmare, spoiled Koga is shown to be concerned about how his father is using Jin's accomplishments for clout. Koga kept wondering about how all he ever wanted was to be a hero of justice and not some fraud, until Konoha met him in his room and showed the pendant she found before Jin was taken to the hospital earlier. Back to Mitsugai. The old man succeeds in making Jin transform with the use of extreme emotions, and he absolutely destroys the test monster that was inside the chamber with him. Jin didn't return to his human form this time, unlike the last one. Mitsugai had to give him a bigger shock, so he shoots Akemi's clone right in front of him. Jin gets back to normal, and he later wakes up in a cell where Mitsugai drugs him again and takes him to the Forgotten World. Jin is taken back to the lab, where he was originally taken by Goro, and Mitsugai shows Jin a statue with a ring just like the one Jin had on his hand. Upon contact, Jin's angel ring began resonating with the statue, which made Jin go through extreme pain. After Mitsugai had proven his point to Jin, he further explains how he was also involved in Jin's development alongside Goro. Apparently, Jin was made as a hunter named Zet, whose sole purpose was to kill players, but as Goro wanted Jin to grow up as a human, he ditched Mitsugai when the players started breaking out of the facility years ago. Everything was pretty much clear to Jin now, and after seeing how Jin cares about Akemi, Mitsugai takes Jin to see her one last time. Mitsugai tells Jin that he needs to stay away from Akemi if he wants her to be safe, and Jin accepts the deal to become Zet the Hunter on the condition that Mitsugai will find a way to reunite Akemi with her son, whom she lost in a court case to her husband. We move 2 more years ahead in time after the deal is made, and by now the situation with players had only gotten worse. Now a sand monster was out committing crimes in town, and Jin was found back in the police station, where the detective released him after a pep talk. Jin was seemingly close with the detective due to the events from a few years ago, and as he is walking back to his place, we see how he has a whole surveillance team keeping an eye on him. You see, Jin's power wasn't as simple as it seemed, since they required a certain Z factor to reach 100%. Jin was still involved in some lab testing, and to help him out with transformation, he was granted a special chewing gum. While Jin was returning to the place he was living, he came across Konoha, who was helping out homeless people with her mother. The homeless people were happy to see Jin as he helped them regularly, but as Konoha approached Jin, he acted a bit harshly towards her for her own safety. Jin returns to his place and finds a strange girl in a corner. This girl had run into Jin's place after she came across the infamous sand monster a little earlier. The girl's name was Tanaka Hanako, and Jin was generous enough to give her something to eat before she prepares to leave. The dinner gets disturbed when Jin suddenly runs out to check up on some noise, and Hanako gets herself in trouble when she gets caught by the same sand monster she ran away from. Jin, of course, pulls up to help her for his signature 10,000 yen, but the fight gets a bit tougher than Jin expected, and he had to use his chewing gum. Jin's Z factor hits the marks after he feels some pain, and he does transform into Z. However, this time, his body turned white for some reason. Jin tears the sand monster apart easily, but since the monster wasn't completely destroyed, Jin didn't return to his human form, and his Z factor kept rising. This creates panic among Mitsugai's men, but before they could have done something, the sand monster is killed by the masked man from earlier, who is called the Sweeper. With that, Jin also returns to his normal form, and he heads back to his place with an unconscious Hanako. The Sweeper pulls up on Jin as well, and he was about to stab him in the back if it wasn't for Seiji, who still had a keen interest in Jin after all these years. Jin reports to Mitsugai afterwards, and the old man tells him to be careful with the Sweeper since his job is to maintain balance for the humans. The night ends, and Hanako wakes up at Jin's place the next day, where she thanks him after revealing how she hates to be left alone and that she is too scared now. Jin accepts her request and allows her to stay with him for one more day. While Jin was dealing with Hanako, we see how Koga was caught up in his fantasies of becoming a superhero, just like the alphas he saw on TV. Koga was getting a superhero suit prepared for him at his father's organization, and after he rejects the first prototype for not being white, the guy comes across an old man named Jiro who asks him to prove his worth if he wishes to become a hero. The old man makes Koga quickly make a choice, and he decides to choose to help Konoha, but it turns out to be quite serious as this decision leads to the death of 3 random girls from Koga's school. The murder is broadcasted the next day, and the old man calls Koga, remarking how this was all Koga's mistake for not proving his worth as a hero. Koga gets confused and heads to his organization, where he is informed about the new suit that is made for him. Koga drops Jiro for now, and he decides to check out his suit after telling Konoha to be safe over the phone. Seiji is seen in town again, and now Jiro's intentions seem to come out more vividly when he seems to be acquainted with Seiji. We move back to Jin since he now had to go grocery shopping as Hanako was staying with him, but as he was leaving, Hanako persisted to come along, making the guy forget his chewing gum behind. Jin was walking down the road, with Hanako sticking close, when he came across Konoha, who had come to return Jin's necklace. Seeing Hanako makes Konoha a bit caught up in her own feelings, and she chooses to leave the necklace for a later date. Jin continues to walk ahead, but suddenly he tells Hanako to go ahead, and he was sensing some danger from the area Konoha was in. Jin rushes to check up on Konoha, but he finds himself in some trouble as now Konoha and her friend were kidnapped by monsters, forcing Jin to play along with their little game without his Z-Factor chewing gum. The fight begins, but Jin is not really able to do anything since even pain is not helping him to transform into Z. The surveillance team sees this and is willing to help, but Mitsugai stops them, remarking that Jin must be trying an alternative way to transform. While the old man was all too excited about the transformation, Konoha was in a bad spot as the other monster gave her a bad injury on her neck. Konoha's suffering was also being monitored, but this time by Jiro, who was basically there to witness how Koga handles this situation now since he was on his way here as well. Koga was coming in at high speed, and back at Jin's place, Hanako was already having some health and emotional issues that seemed to get worse when she saw a horde of insects rushing towards her. Back to Jin. Even though Jin's Z-Factor was not rising as quickly as it should have, he is still able to distract the monster and reach Konoha. Jin frees the injured Konoha from her restraints, but before he could have taken her to safety, multiple new monsters arrive in the building and stab Jin in his back. Jin had no choice but to fight in his bad state, and as he was about to be taken out, Koga arrives and kills the monsters with his new suit powers. Koga was now supposed to help the injured out, but he is unable to decide if he wants to leave Jin and the other girl behind or not. Koga ends up sending the girls to safety, and as he leaves, Jin tries to drag himself back to action. Jin was trying to help others when many homeless people who had been helping out came to help him instead this time around. Despite the risk, the homeless men decide to fight the monsters off with whatever sticks they had as weapons, and Jin meets Seiji once again, who sticks an object in his chest that makes him feel extreme pain. The object was like a nail related to Jin's own angel ring, and it gives Jin so much pain that he finally transforms into Z, a completely red one this time. This new red form was the most elite one anyone had ever seen throughout the history of these experiments. Mitsugai's crew was absolutely shocked by witnessing this state of Z, and they decide to further spectate as Jin jumped in to face the monsters for a second round now. While Jin was looking for the insect monster to fight, Koga was dealing with the shrimp one, and despite all of his ambitions for becoming a hero, the real-life fight was harder than he expected. Jin catches up to the shrimp's partner, and as the monster threatens to hurt Hanako, Jin uses his ring of evolution to force the monster into its true form. Jin's power was incomprehensible, but while he was fighting, Seiji pulled up to explain the situation a little. Seiji remarks how he was a special type of creature called Evil, and that he was the one who recruited these monsters for attacking Jin and the girls, just for the sake of seeing Jin's red form in action. Jin finishes the job as he kills the fiend in a single blow, and Seiji flees the scene as well. On the other hand, Koga was having a hard time fighting, so Jin pulled up to give him a helping hand. The fight got a little tougher than Jin would have liked, as now he suddenly starts feeling weird, allowing him to be attacked by the shrimp monster. Jin's body starts to disintegrate, and he comes back to his black and white form. Seiji was also spectating the fight, while back at the surveillance office, the doctor was shocked as to how even though the Z factor was 180%, Jin hadn't returned to his human form yet. Due to the form, Jin is still able to keep standing, and before throwing hands, he tries to reason with the shrimp guy, telling him how he was being used by Seiji. The monster denies, and hence with the help of Koga, Jin ends up killing it. Back at the surveillance room, Mitsugai's men were confused as even though Jin had just killed a player and his Z factor was at 200%, he was still not transforming back. After the fight was over, Seiji is seen to be meeting up with Jiro, where he reports his disappointment in how much human Jin feels despite being a Z. A while later at the rooftops, Jin also finally disintegrates. As he falls into Koga's arms, the whole transformation situation gets even more complicated, as now Jin was in his human form without a drop in his Z factor. The chaotic day finally comes to an end, and as Koga walks Jin back to his place, with the truth behind Z still unclear, our recap for the day comes to an end. Thanks for sticking till the end, and let us know in the comments if you guys want a second part of this series. Don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.